There's breaking news today that I'm going to get straight into. I was going to say shocking breaking news, but frankly, it's it's terrible, but it's not surprising. So I can't say shocking because shocking would imply surprise. I'm just going to read out this report. Putin critic Alexei Navalny, 47, dies in Arctic Circle jail. This is the BBC reports by Paul Kirby. Russia's most significant opposition leader for the past decade, Alexei Navalny, has died in an Arctic Circle jail, the prison service said. Seen as President Vladimir Putin's most vociferous critic, Navalny was serving a 19-year jail term on charges widely considered politically motivated. He was moved to one of Russia's toughest penal colonies last year. The prison service in the Yamalo-Nenets region said Navalny had felt unwell after a walk on Friday. He had almost immediately lost consciousness, it said in a statement, adding that an emergency medical team had immediately been called and tried to resuscitate him, but without success. The emergency doctors declared the prisoner dead, cause of death is being established. Navalny, 47, was seen only a day ago looking well and laughing during a court hearing via video link. His lawyer, Leonid Solovyov, told Russian media he would not be commenting yet, although Navalny's close aide Leonid Volkov wrote on X, Russian authorities published a confession that they killed Alexei Navalny in prison. We do not have any way to confirm it or to prove that this isn't true. Within minutes of Navalny's death being announced by the prison service, the international community hailed the courage of Vladimir Putin's biggest domestic adversary. France said he had helped pay with his life for resisting Russian oppression, while Norway's foreign minister said Russian authorities bore a great responsibility for his death. Mr. Putin's spokesman Dmitry Peskov said merely that Navalny's death had been reported to the president, who was on a visit to the city of Chelyabinsk. Most of the Russian president's critics have fled Russia, but Alexei Navalny returned in January 2021 after months of medical treatment. In August 2020, he was poisoned at the end of a trip to Siberia with a Novichok nerve agent. His team succeeded in flying him out to Germany for specialist treatment, and on his return to Moscow, he was immediately taken into custody. He would never leave jail again in the next 37 months. Navalny, who was 47, had long sought to challenge Putin at the ballot box, but he was barred from running in the 2018 presidential election. Next month, Russia's leader will stand unchallenged by any meaningful opposition. Anti-war candidate Boris Nadezhdin was banned from standing in the election because of supposed irregularities found in the thousands of signatures submitted in support of his candidacy. Navalny, whose opposition began in the form of an anti-corruption campaign, is the latest in a string of prominent Russian figures who have died while challenging Putin's rule. Opposition leader Boris Nemtsov was shot dead in a Moscow bridge a stone's throw from the Kremlin in 2015, and Wagner boss Yevgeny Prigozhin was killed in August 2023 in an unexplained plane crash, weeks after leading his mercenaries in an armed mutiny. Yet Navalny repeatedly laughed off his friends from concern for his health. He was moved from a penal colony east of Moscow in December and was not seen for weeks until he reappeared in a penal colony in the Arctic town of Karp. Navalny said he had been taken on a 20-day trip around Russia, telling reporters during a court appearance by video that his conditions were much better than his previous colony in Vladimir, that's a city outside Moscow. However, he was repeatedly punished by his prisons with solitary confinement. His spokeswoman, Kira Yarmish, said last month he had spent more than 280 days in isolation. Navalny had not been due to leave prison until his 70s because of his most recent conviction for extremism last August. It was his third jail sentence, and supporters accused the Kremlin of trying to silence him for good. Russian human rights activist and journalist Eva Murchacheva said on Friday that he had been placed in solitary confinement at least 27 times, saying it could not but play a role in his death. In such extreme conditions, doctors knew such punishment was very harmful to the human body, so under no law, no one could be given more than 15 days in isolation, she said. This is big news. Now, Navalny is by no means the first Putin critic to die. I think of Anna Politkovskaya, the journalist. I think of Maria Estimarova of the Memorial Group, who documented war crimes in Chechnya. In Britain, of course, Alexander Litvinenko. And there's many, many other Russians at the moment. Vladimir Kara-Murza um, is yet another critic of Putin who is languishing in prison. Um, this is thoroughly depressing because really, of all those people, Navalny was a figurehead of the Russian opposition. Not the only one, but he was arguably the most prominent. And now he's dead. Now, the specific cause of death, who knows? It may well be that the conditions, despite the brave front that he put on, just got the better of him. Maybe it was organ failure from a weakened condition. Who knows? I'm not medical, I can't comment on that, but it goes without saying that at some point the human body is going to give in. Now, Navalny was a tough guy. I think he was physically tough, leaving aside his obvious bravery. I think he was physically strong. This is a man who survived poisoning and survived numerous attacks. So I think he was physically tough, but clearly this is just I don't know whether it's a result of the treatment he was getting in prison or whether a rogue element was in prison and just poisoned him for good. Who knows? The fact that prison services, got medical attention is not here or there, really. Make no mistake, his death is absolutely 100% on Putin's hands. Um, and what more can be said? I think this will be a very, very disillusioning moment for the those brave Russians who are still defying Putin. I mean, this is a man who had an awful choice to make. As a journalist Luke Harding pointed out, he's just been commenting on this. I've got his book, Mafia State. He's pointed out that Navalny had this awful choice of sort of leading the opposition from outside Russia, which would have been safer, or flying back. He courageously chose to fly back. I've heard this argument about Chinese dissidents. I've had this debate with some Chinese acquaintances of mine about those student leaders in 1989, and one of the critiques was, well, they left China. The implication being they weren't really patriotic and they were just self-serving, which is nonsense in my opinion. But Navalny went back to Russia despite the risks, precisely to show that he was a patriot. Um, it would have been not safe, but it would have been safer to be in Germany. But as we know, Putin's tentacles reach far. Alexander Litvinenko was poisoned, and he was in Britain. But with all of this, the so-called election next month can be written off. It will be a shoe-in for the Russian tyrant. Apparently, there's now more dissidents locked up in Russia than even in the worst excesses of the Cold War during Leonid Brezhnev's regime and Yuri Andropov's regime. Um, Russia under Putin is an absolute harsh totalitarian state, one of the worst in the world, and it's only got worse. So it's thoroughly depressing. I mean, after the Cold War, there was a period of optimism and a sense that things were changing. Um, and now we're in a situation with the worst totalitarian in Russia, I would say, since Stalin. I don't think that's an exaggeration. Um, very depressing. Uh, but I would also add that this just further, to my mind, it makes it all the more abhorrent and repulsive that Donald Trump would invite this regime to attack a NATO country. It's treacherous, it's repugnant, it's morally bankrupt, and it shows Trump's utter lack of statesmanship. I don't know if his team will come out with some statement, but as far as I'm concerned, that's crocodile tears when he's simultaneously effectively acting as a cheerleader for Putin. I don't know what the West could do in response to this, further sanctions. I mean, what can be done? Um, I think that the West needs to be actively assisting Russian dissidents who may be seeking asylum. That's something that could be done. Um, I think going down the line of sort of engineering, not a coup, that would definitely lead to potentially World War III. I wouldn't go down that line, but um, clearly there are brave Russians who do speak out, but it's such a difficult situation. It's not, not everyone can be as brave as Alexei Navalny. His mother said that he was healthy a few days ago and he suddenly died, so she's implying that he was indeed murdered. I don't know if it was a case that he was murdered by rogue elements in the prison, as in actually physically murdered, or it was just the harsh conditions that, you know, that either way, it's almost irrelevant because either way, clearly the regime was trying to get him out of the way, particularly harsh penal conditions. Um, I heard that in this prison they feed prisoners deliberately sugary food so that it, causes tooth problems and then just to add to the misery. Um, I mean, this really is arguably as bad as the gulags. It's effectively a gulag in everything but name. Um, I don't know what else can be said. It's abhorrent, but it is right that there's condemnation from liberal democracies. Navalny's death is entirely on Putin's hands, and it shows Putin for at core a card. Really, this is the thing about dictators. Often it's said that they're strong men, they're powerful figures because technically they have power, but at core they're cards because they're scared of criticism. That's the point about dictators. They're scared of criticism. The same applies to Xi Jinping and every other tyrant on this world. They are at core cards because they can't handle criticism. They cannot handle dissenting voices. And this is just another stain on the Kremlin's record. And anyone tempted to say that Navalny he was facing criminal charges, look at the record. Is it really a case that all of Putin's critics are criminals? Or is it more likely that they are faced with trumped up charges in order to silence them? That's pretty damn obvious. And even if he was guilty of any criminal offence, which I don't believe for a second, um, there's a basic principle of human rights whereby, the extensive periods of solitary confinement, for example, um, and I'm aware it's used in the American system as well. I'm critical of it, but this is an absolute stain on yet another stain on Putin's record, and it's a very dark day for the Russian opposition. The only caveat is Navalny will be remembered. Putin will not last forever. At some point, whether there's another successful military coup, whether he dies of natural causes at some point, and then there'll be a power vacuum. I don't know. At some point, Putin's going to die or be gone, and then maybe Russia will see a brighter future.